Hello and welcome to another video where I gush about my favorite series of all time and try to prepare you for some things about it. Hello again and welcome to the Ponderings of Pete. I am Pete and this is my channel where I talk about books that I like because I like talking about books and I like the effects that books have on people. That's me. Anyways, Ken Liu, Dandelion Dynasty. Yes, it's my favorite series of all time. And the more I think about it, the more I'm just like very certain about that. And picking favorites is hard for me. So I want to do this video, kind of just like there's some things that, I don't know, I feel like there's some things that put people off about this series, right? Whether it's something they're not prepared for or a different writing style that they're like, wow, this is weird. And you know, I want to either put some things to rest or just be like, hey, you're about to go read Dandelion Dynasty here. This is, I want to help prepare you if that's at all possible. And help you decide whether or not you should read this. I mean, I think you should because I really love this series and I want more people to read it. But so let's talk about this. So high level, what should you be prepared for? Big concept. This is an Asian inspired fantasy. It's specifically based off of some of the history of China. Not all of it, like the very first book, I'll get into this, is based off of the history of China. It's about the advancing into modernity as a nation, right? The big concept is, what if China specifically was a nation that was not affected by the concepts of the West before they advanced into modernity, right? Because if we look at China's history, we have British imperialism, the Opium War, and then communism, which came from the West, Western philosophy, that all really shaped China away from where it was going with the imperial dynasties. That really kind of like took it away from that. So, big concept. What if that hadn't happened, and how would have they advanced into the modern day with just the traditions and the history that is so very vast and rich within China? I think that it could be considered China and Japan. I don't know that much about. I don't know enough about East Asian history to tell you for certain. I think it could be considered that, but I'm not the one to ask about that. I think that there are a lot of big themes within this series, but a lot of them are also very accessible in the way that Ken Liu writes it, whether it's from the perspective of the certain characters that are affected by these themes, or it's just like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a lot of these things are hard to grasp, and I think there's a lot in this series for people to grasp and to connect to. There's a lot of different things that people can connect to in this series that make it, I think, more widely appealing to a lot of people once you've read it. Really, I think the first really obvious thing to prepare yourself for is it's a really long series. I'm pretty sure every book is around 1,000 pages, if not more. They're thick. You should be in it for the long haul. But there are some aspects of the writing style that I think mitigate that a little bit. Yes, it's long, but Ken Liu was a short story writer, right? A good entrance for Ken Liu is The Paper Menagerie or Hidden Girl and Other Stories. I think I would recommend The Paper Menagerie, but that's a good thing to get. Like, that's good to get just into the type of writer Ken Liu is, because that, I think, shows in his writing. His writing style definitely evolves by the time we get to like Speaking Bones. But it's still, especially in Grace of Kings, you can see that he's telling a bunch of short stories tying into this bigger narrative. So that allows you to, I think, be able to more easily jump in and out of this book. And in regards to jumping in and out of it anyways with Grace of Kings, Grace of Kings is a more historical narrative. It's based heavily, I believe, it was the Han Dynasty of Chinese history. And that in particular is like one of the things about it being kind of a historical narrative that puts some people off, is because it's very closely based on Han Dynasty history. Why wasn't this just a historical fantasy? Well, the reason is because after Grace of Kings, it goes radically away from Chinese history. Like so much, like it's not even recognizable. Grace of Kings is very much a historical narrative, and then it goes off because Ken Liu is trying to build a foundation of just the myths and the legends that this society, this nation has to build off of, because all of the narratives, or a good portion of the narratives within Grace of Kings, take on so much more meaning as the series goes on, right? Something that is like, feels like a character was like in there and out of there and like, you know, might have died within like 3 or 4 chapters, right? That's a story that could affect someone further down the line and might be referenced later on. Not that you have to keep track of that, because the references will be clearly explained. So Grace of Kings becomes actually so much better as time goes on, because you realize how it inspires and how it just affects the society at a very core level. But it's really great. It introduces a lot of the themes, like for instance, the whole concept of Grace of Kings, like who is worthy to wield the Grace of Kings, is a big theme throughout here. Gosh, should have talked about that last video. Dang, I knew it was going to happen. Yeah. So the other thing about this short story writing style is it changes over time. I mentioned this briefly. If you're not a fan of the style of Grace of Kings, I think the best litmus test is like the last third of Grace of Kings. Like the writing style changes from a very like top down, zoom in and out of historical events to something that's more personal, where it's actually like it feels like it's following the same characters more in the last like quarter to third of the book. If you start to like that more than the rest of the book, then you definitely should continue, because Wall of Storms and Grace of Kings feel like really pretty different writing styles, because Wall of Storms actually follows specific characters a lot closer than Grace of Kings does. The other thing about his short story writing style he does is you will be introduced to a character, and the next few chapters are going to be that character's backstory. And this is something that happens consistently throughout all of the books. He does it a lot more in Grace of Kings, I think, if I remember correctly, but it still happens throughout the rest of the books. So that's something you should prepare yourself for. It's like, hi, here's a character. Next chapter. Hi, this is the years and years of backstory of this guy's in the army, and like, who is this character and why should you care about them? And it was off-putting a little bit in Grace of Kings for me, but as time goes on, I got a lot more used to it, and it was fine with it. There's maybe one that I think some people are like, oh gosh, you just told me this character's backstory and then they died. Why did that matter? And it's like, I didn't have a problem with it, because I was just going with the vibe, but that's just how I am. It's something to prepare yourself for. Speaking of things that start out in Grace of Kings and then change later on, let's talk about female characters. One of the things that I've seen people make is about the female characters in Grace of Kings, specifically in Grace of Kings, because these people have only read Grace of Kings. They think that a lot of the female characters either fall into specific tropes that they don't like, or they fall into just not being on the page much. And part of this is because it's a historical narrative. Part of this is because they are really keyed in to some of the more egregious annoyances in the fantasy genre, right? And so they see these things and they start kind of projecting that a little bit onto Grace of Kings, in my opinion. This all changes after Grace of Kings. Like, nobody, if you read Wall of Storms, you will no longer have those complaints, because the characters get so much richer. The characters are much more explored, the female characters in specifics, throughout the rest of the series. And that's about all I can tell you, is that if you have any objections about the female characters, read on, keep going. Don't just put down at Grace of Kings, keep going, and then tell me if you have the same objections later on, because I have not encountered anybody that does. And I think that was something that was very purposeful on Ken Liu's part, and he did a really good job with it. The last thing I want to talk about is the engineering. So one of the things that Ken Liu has described this book as is it's an epic fantasy, but instead of wizards, you have engineers. So there are times that, like with the character backstory, he will be like, hi, here's this new invention. Let me tell you about how it was made. And it's a narrative about the characters coming together and making it, and the different things they did, different things that they tried, how they discovered the certain mechanics of these specific inventions and stuff like that. And it's really cool. I think, to me at least. These are throughout the books, and they're not going away. They're just there. And it's really cool. A lot of these things Ken Liu actually built himself and to make sure they work, which is really cool. And it is something that is intrinsically tied to the theme of modernity, in my opinion, because technology is such a huge part of that, right? It's showing the advancements of technology, of whether it's due to war, whether it's due to peacetime, or whatever the technological advances are for. It's just showing you these things, right? And overall, this is something I think most people are different, is something really different for a lot of people. I think if you read K.J. Parker, he does this in some of his novels and some of his novellas. Like if you've read the Engineer trilogy, and then I think he's done it in The Hammer as well, from what I remember. And then he'll do it with like the systems in Folding Knife. If you like K.J. Parker, you will like this part of these books. I mean, that's basically what I'll say. Yeah, that's about it for engineering technology. It's great. And I think that's about it. All I have. Let me know if did I miss anything? Like, are there other things that you think I should have talked about to help people get prepared, or things that you didn't like about these books that you think that I could have talked about? I don't know. I love these books, and I hope that this has helped you get to a point where you want to read these books. Hopefully, we'll see. But I just hope this was informative, and yeah, read these books. They're great. Have a great day and have a great night, and get some rest, because rest is super important. Bye.